Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Today I'm talking with Kirk Woller, who, amongst other things, is one of the administrators of a Facebook group for antinatalists. Kirk, firstly, just very briefly, how old are you?
I'm currently 63 years old.
Okay, great. And tell us when you first started thinking about the idea of procreation.
Well, I would say it would be when I was probably the end of my third year of life. And I know, and then when I was 4, my mother was pregnant with number 3. And it just occurred to me, I first thought, because of what I just saw in life, just being that old, the stresses, the deaths. I spent some time on my grandfather's farm a lot when I was younger. And, having to slaughter animals and grow things, just the overall stress of my father working hard and my mother. And in just all of it, I thought, well, surely we're all here with without choice. We're all here because we're the leftovers, we're the accidents, and everyone's working together to try and make this life as best we can, given the fact that we were the unlucky ones to be here. And then after I quizzed my mother about the pregnancy with number 3, I just asked her if it was a choice or it just happened to women, just like growing up. And she said, no, it was a choice your father and I made. And at that point, I thought, wow, people actually are choosing to put people on this planet and suffer through life. It just amazed me. I thought, oh no, this is terrible. So I just told myself then that I would never do that. And then I would go on to just think about it and study more in case for some reason I was wrong about the simple idea that I had. And all my life, I've looked for something that would cause me to think it's an incorrect assumption that putting people here is really a abusive and non-consensual act. And I haven't found any argument that stands up to the simple prevention that it is. So that's when I became an antinatalist, really, when I was 4 years old.
Wow, I mean, that's incredibly early. When did you first start talking to other people about this idea?
When did I start talking to other people?
Yeah,
Well,
what age?
I guess in elementary school, I had a good friend in 4th grade, and at recess sometimes or lunch, we had a lot of playtime back in elementary school in the 60s here, usually 2+ hours a day during the day. And so when you were done doing some sport activity, sometimes you had some time to wait, and I would talk with him about some things like that. But in general, I found that people I did try and talk to about this simple idea, I got confused looks or whispers. Teachers really weren't sure about me. My mother is very religious. My dad is a Catholic, or was Catholic. And so trying to talk to a religious leader or a minister or a priest about it got me nowhere also. So I found that I seemed very alone in this simple idea of just don't dig holes and you don't have to work to fill them back up concept. So I found that it caused me sometimes more trouble than it was worth. And I just thought I'm just going to have to wait until I'm on my own as an adult, and then I'll have to pick and choose the people I talk to about it, see if there's anyone else that has this idea, which didn't seem so complex to me, but it seemed to shock and amaze most people.
Right. And when you were in your maybe late teens or early 20s, did you find other people that could have that understood it, that felt the same way?
Interestingly, yes, when I was in college at university, I lived in a housing co-op that had 36 people in an old turn of the century house, turn of the last century, I should say, uh, which was a good number of people. We were just a few blocks off campus. We did mutual work together in the house to try and make it cheaper. The food was bought in bulk, so it was a cheaper way to live in. It was a beautiful old house, and so I felt fortunate there. And in that house, and it was a vegetarian co-op actually, which was interesting. So you couldn't cook meat in the house. You could bring something in if it was already cooked into your room, and if it didn't have an aroma, it smelled like dying flesh or cooked flesh, then you pretty much, it was frowned upon. So it was interesting that it was a vegetarian co-op as well. And I actually met my first college girlfriend there. She was a few years older than I was, and she had the same exact idea as I did. So I thought, wow, interesting. So I did meet someone there, and then I have the friends I've kept from that house. None of them have children, interestingly enough. And it's probably half a dozen I've kept up with over the last 50, 45 years.
Wow. And did you read anything about this particular topic at all at that time? Was there anything to read?
Not that I knew of. The only thing I had, because I had 3 times a week Bible study, where some of the Bible quotes just seemed obvious to me that whether it was Christ or in the Old Testament, that putting someone on this planet at risk of punishment and judgment just seemed like a ridiculous thing. So I mean, if you read it with an open mind, you can see that it doesn't really seem to push procreation, except in very early in Genesis to the, I guess, Adam and Eve, where they were maybe commanded to multiply. But beyond that, you see from the books in the Old Testament and on. But as far as other reading material, I never found anything that was anti-natalist in nature. It was all natalist, from TV shows to magazines, songs in school, obviously religious services, things like that were much more oriented towards natalism. There were no one who ever thought of just don't play the game and that's your best way to avoid going to hell. That didn't really make any sense to them for some reason.
Yeah, it's interesting you quoted Genesis, because a friend of mine sent me an article, which if I remember, I'm going to link in the description, which is the title is "Be Fruitful and Multiply: The Most Tragic Translation Error." And what it goes on to say is that the Hebrew words is peru or revu, which mean be fruitful, and revu means can mean it can be enlarge or greater than, right? And the article argues that the idea of multiplication was not around in those days. It was the arithmetic concept of multiplication wasn't around in those days, and so that perhaps when it said be fruitful and multiply, what it really meant was be fruitful, on the earth, and grow as a person, be something like that.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, there are other, since all of it wasn't written in English, there's a lot of
oh yeah,
religious people, especially here in Texas, want to believe. You have even simple concepts. You see how memes develop, like what fruit was in the Garden of Eden, and probably at least half people that are familiar with the Bible will say, oh, it's an apple, right?
Yeah.
And it never states apple at all. It just says fruit. That's all it says. So it could have been a really nice banana or something.
Right.
So sure, translation errors, probably the 666 beast. I think what I was reading at one place was they actually mistranslated that number, and it's not 666. It's some change of that number. I mean, I'm sure all throughout. And then when you had the Catholic Church put together the various letters and things that they wanted in there, I'm sure there was some selectivity in both the books and the translations, and they put it all together. So yeah, a lot of hanky-panky going on for sure, as far as just the historical aspect of it.
Yeah. I'm gonna just go back to something that you said, which is interesting. You spoke about natalism, and I think some of the people listening to this won't even know what that is. Which brings me on to the question: what do you see antinatalism as? What is antinatalism to you? When did you first come across the word, and what does it mean to you?
I think probably in the 2000s, maybe late 2000s, I think I saw that term perhaps. And when I saw what it was, I said, "Oh, this is my life belief." And so someone's put a name on it. I hadn't really seen that term before that. It was just not procreating. And then I thought, well, I wonder if it means it's just against birth, and therefore growing people in test tubes or creating life in some other ways would be okay, like Dr. Frankenstein. Or was it really, it meant just against procreation? Or the other thought I had is that could also mean it's against natalism. So as opposed to antinatalism, which would be the philosophy of being against procreation or birth, if you want to think of it that way, it's actually also against natalism. And I think a lot of people never even think of how they're surrounded on a daily basis by natalism, which is, a mimetic philosophical entity in a sense that gets passed along so well. It's so well designed through all the different organizations that we encounter that it's even self-reinforcing. So parents, condition their children, the schools condition the children, and it becomes self-reinforcing. So it's brilliant. It's a brilliant strategy to keep the cogs, moving all in order. But I think a lot of people don't even realize that their thoughts, their very actions are very much influenced by natalism, which is, the belief that we should procreate. And I always think it's interesting when people say, oh, well, no, it's mostly people are here because sex is instinctual and people get together and then babies occur after the fact. But it's interesting, anytime you bring up antinatalism and someone gets a hold of it, whether it's a church or some religion or a business or the military or the government, whoever it might be, you will see articles and things written being very much concerned about these people who don't want to have children. And I think, well, what skin is off your back if people decide not to procreate? And they're very, very concerned and write very much against it. Well, that's natalism in action. And as an admin on the Facebook site, I see daily all types of articles are submitted, and I also see other ones from different organizations when they get wind of antinatalist activity. They are hot and bothered by it. And I think, why does it bother them so much? See, because they're part of the natalistic indoctrination that we endure. So if anyone doubts there's natalism out there, all you have to do is put forth the idea of not procreating, and you will see the resistance rise very quickly, if you don't see it in just the friends and people you talk to around you.
Yeah, I mean, I was indoctrinated from a very, very young age. I was brought up in an Orthodox Jewish home, and I'd never met anybody until I was way over 30 that made a decision not to have children. I didn't ever come across that idea, and for me it was just a matter of time, and that was what I was going to do. And like you say, the natalism is so pervasive. It's everywhere, and you got these little girls having little push chairs and with strollers with babies in it, and it's all part of that whole thing. And the funny, and the funny thing about it is that it's very clever, and we'll come on to that in a moment. But it's also there's a lot of fantasy involved in it, and there's a lot of ignorance about what you're actually doing, and certainly there was for me. So in other words, the fantasy we speak about, people speak about having children or having a baby, and I personally find babies and children very cute at times, not all the time, but at times I find them very, very cute. And I think that's all part of the conspiracy that gets people to bring people into existence, because they bring these cute little fluffy, loving, cute things, innocent beings into existence. But eventually they grow up.
Well, they become adults.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I do think that biologically too, you see it in animals. I spent a lot of time on the farm, and you would see animals sometimes actively resist being inseminated. I mean, from running to fighting, but when it eventually does happen, I think there's hormonal changes and things, so that eventually they're wired to take care of uh, the results. Although very often in the animal world, especially if they see a runt or one that's maybe not too capable there, they'll kill them and be done with that, because they don't want that animal to suffer in the long term. And that's their only solution, because a lot of them can't really necessarily help the you see the pregnant cats that walk around. I don't think they necessarily choose that. It's just a consequence of nature in that case. But people are smarter than that, obviously. They know where babies come from, so they can make decisions. And that's the saddest thing to me is I don't blame a duck that's laying eggs, but people know better. And the fact that they don't use their minds to just think through a little bit to see what am I doing here and why. That's really sad to me. It's shameful, it really is.
Yes, but it's I don't blame them for it either, because we've all been dragged into existence without our consent, and then we've been subjected to a huge amount of conditioning, as we've already said, and then there's DNA, which we'll get to in a moment. I'd like to just backtrack a bit, because I'd like you to tell us about a little bit about your life and about your education, about your career, and your relationships. Yeah. Could you just briefly tell us a little bit about that?
Wow. Where do you want me to start? When I was young? How much detail? Maybe a few specific questions might help guide me along. How much detail?
Okay. What was your you went to university. To what level did you get educated, and what were your degrees in?
I went through University of Texas in Austin, originally for aerospace engineering, and I switched my majors when I found out that in my junior year that most of the guys, or the graduates the year before, were being put on cruise missile technology, those kind of things. And I thought, do I really want to spend my days building better bombs? And I thought, no, I do not. So I switched math, physics, and got a degree. And then after I got my bachelor's degree, I thought, nah, I get a teaching certificate just in case I can't find an industry job with a math, physics degree. And I did that, and I actually taught school, and then I went to university, junior college, and taught some years there. So that was about 4 or 5 years. Then I decided to go back to school, went to graduate school, and got a computer science degree, and then kind of split teaching and working as a software engineer over the rest of my career, teaching here and there when I was between projects or didn't find work that I was interested in doing. And I taught computer science, physics, and math. So I usually taught the advanced placement or gifted, talented students if I weren't doing engineering work. And I worked I had my own business. I worked for the Department of Defense several times. I worked for Siemens Corporation, Texas Instruments, which used to make the calculators, things like that. I worked on expert systems. I worked on voice. They were still working on voice back then, voice recognition. They were having trouble when people were ill. They couldn't be recognized. They had trouble with twins as far as security goes, because either person could use the voice activation and it would work. I think they've worked through most of that, because you have a lot of voice on phones and things now that they are used for security. What else? I did traffic control systems like that. Not so interesting for most people. What else? I also was interested when I was younger in the martial arts and wrestling, sports activities. I didn't have much support from my family, but I did eventually meet an instructor from China who went through UT graduate school in computer science department, and he was teaching part-time at the university there. And I studied in a group of about 50 students he had. And he actually has the patent on the right click on the mouse, because he worked at IBM. It was interesting. But I went through, and I eventually, through into my late 30s, 40s, started teaching, and I had well, I guess here, it's a seventh thing, or what we would call a third degree black belt in combat Swaijao. So I would do that part time in the evenings after work. So a lot of martial arts, and then also I trained in triathlon, which I like: swimming, biking, and running. Those are mostly my two sports there. And let's see. So university. What else? Where are we? What else do you want to know about that part?
And what are you married or single?
Oh, I did. I met a wonderful woman when I was about 27 at the gym, believe it or not. And after we talked for hours the first time we got together, and she just seemed like a very hardworking, professional young lady, and she liked me, so we dated, and then eventually moved in together and matched our careers. And I guess we were in that kind of state until I was 46, 47 years old, and we eventually decided to get married. And some of that was because of the tax implications and insurance implications. Although my wife might wince at that, but that was part of it because we already had a relationship for a good 20 years by then.
And you're still with her?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And she also didn't want to procreate?
Yeah, that was a condition. I told her there's two or three things that I'm just not going to change, and then she was fine with that. I think she had the same kind of thoughts behind it. She wasn't intent on family, if you call it that. And I just wanted to make sure that she knew that wasn't going to change. It was, if there was anything philosophically rock bottom foundation for me, it's just however bad my life is, whatever purposeful or non-purposeful things I do that hurt other people or animals, all that will end with me regardless. So that would be my success in life. And I think she saw that I was very serious. And I think since she believed fundamentally the same thing, just didn't put as many words to it as I had. She said, "Sure, okay. I mean, it's okay." So we don't have children, and now it's too late. So can't happen.
Right. How if I can get personal now, how have you avoided having children? What methods have you used?
For me, mostly it's just a disciplined approach. I wasn't, very super sexually active or anything. I mean, dates for me, I would pre-screen people before I would spend some time with them. So I didn't date a lot. I could see through people pretty quickly and saw that we weren't going to make sense together. And then my college girlfriend that I had for 5, 6 years there, she wanted a tubal ligation, I believe it was. And she was in her mid-20s and she couldn't find any doctor that would do that. And she was frustrated. And then I think she had this flash of inspiration one morning. She said, "I know what I'll do. I'm going to find a racist doctor." And because she's part Native American and Mexican American, she just went to a very white, older doctor. And he's like, "When do you want to sign up?" He couldn't wait to sterilize her.
Wow.
So she ended up with a tubal ligation. But I thought that was a funny twist.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about? Just before we finish with that, I assume, having heard what you said, I assume you have absolutely no regrets.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best thing I've ever done. It's the best decision I've ever made in my life. And I'm happy every morning when I wake up that it's just me that has to go through this. And I don't have to answer the really hard questions from my son or daughter about why am I here? Or why am I suffering from this affliction or this? Or why do I have to work 50 hours a week? Why do I have to live in this miserable box? Whatever it is that just really stresses them from life. Why am I blind? Whatever problem they might have that I maybe couldn't help at all, I don't have to worry about any of that. So I feel very comfortable with that. it does also help my stance philosophically, I think, in some ways, because I've walked the walk. But I definitely don't discount people, and even think a little more of them, those who maybe have a family, and then they come to the understanding afterwards, and they're willing to admit that it it was not a mistake, but it was a maybe not the best decision in their lives, whether they decided not to think about it and had their children, or they did and they just came to a different conclusion. So in some ways, it's been easier for me because I can discuss antinatalism, and they say, "Well, how many children do you have?" And I say, "Well, I don't have any." So, you know, that's the proof is in the pudding, right there.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really about ignorance, and you know, a huge amount of ignorance. When I chose to have children, I was just completely ignorant of any of these issues at all. Like, you know, so that's why, you know, that's why I had children, and I think many people are very ignorant about these things, and I remained ignorant until I was at age 50.
Well, having been an educator, the one thing I saw, that ignorance causes so much suffering in the world, just in everything. And as an educator, that's what I wanted to address. And I always thought critical thinking was one of the most important skills a person can have. And then you can put your mind to any problem and try and come up with a good answer. So most of the time when I taught, whether it was computer science or physics or mathematics, what I really was trying to teach these young people was how to think critically. The subject matter was secondary for me. And I think a lot of them did realize that, and that I was trying to give them a tool for their life, not just a physics course that they're going to take and forget later on.
Did you ever manage to subtly insert the ideas and questions about procreation when you were teaching?
Yeah, don't tell my principals or department heads, but sure. I mean, I didn't try and impose on anyone, because that's, you know, I just thought let's stay here. But I would give them additional readings or different things that would maybe help them direct some of their thoughts, especially when they're 17, 18 years old. They're pre-adults, adults. Things I think they really need to be exposed to, so that if it sparks a little bit of doubt or some questioning in their minds about what their parents or their church taught them, they might actually take it from there. So I would hand out matches, is the way I thought about it. What you do with that match, if that sparks something and you end up with a big roaring fire of information, that's on you. But I'm just going to give you the match and tell you, you know, you might want to consider what this can do for you. So yes, I did try and sneak it in as I could.
Okay.
In an honest way.
Yeah. Tell us about the Facebook group. How many?
Okay.
How many
I think
people?
it was maybe. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, how many people are in the group, and tell us what it's like being the admin of a group of people who question the idea of procreation.
Okay. We're nearing 12,000, I think, now. And I signed on, we had, I don't know, 8 or 9. Last I calculated, we were growing at about, don't quote me exactly, maybe 20% a year. And we reject about 1/3 to 1/2 of the applicants, just because they either don't answer the questions, or for some reason, an answer to a question like, "I hate babies, I want to kill them all." Well, we're probably not going to take you to the group, because that's not what it's about. And so I'm really encouraged by the growth rate that I've seen over the last, I'm thinking, around 3 years. I've been an admin. And then I was a member of the group for a little bit of time before that. And then one of the other admins asked me, after seeing what I wrote and that I had a good grasp of the subject, that if I wanted to be an admin to help, one, clean up the site a bit, because people's, you know, emotions come out, and you'll get trolls on there like any site now on social media. And sometimes it was a pretty tough place to be. Just the conversations would get there'd be a lot of vitriol and other things. And they said, we really want to clean this up and make it a civil place to be and discuss antinatalism and associated topics and present information. And people who have questions can come here. People who want moral support can come and share with the rest of their tribe, I guess you'd say. So both support, information, discussions, things like that. And so I think there were two of us brought on, and I think both of us helped do some of the heavy lifting and clean up the site. And so I think it's a fairly safe place to discuss ideas now. And the members provide most of the content. Occasionally, administrators will provide something they think is interesting. It is sometimes a lot of work because people don't follow the rules. You do have to kick people off after a warning or two. Some people do come on just to troll. We try and eliminate those as fast as we can, but you can have a conversation overnight that goes for dozens and dozens of comments before you wake up and see it all in the morning, and then you have to try and find out and figure out who instigated this and who contributed to it, and go from there. But overall, I'm glad it exists. There was no such thing as the internet when I was growing up. There was no support. There was only derision and ridicule, fundamentally, if you expressed an idea like this. So I think it's in some ways a lot easier for younger people today to educate themselves if they want to. And this site can be a part of that education if they want.
Right. Okay, great. My next question is, what are your thoughts about DNA?
DNA. Well, beyond the actual biology of it, is that what you mean? As more, well, in some ways, I think of it like a life virus, and not what's the word, anthropomorphize it, but it very much works for its own survival. So whatever it has to do to keep passing itself along the line, it's simplistic in that way. But that filter that filters out anything that doesn't work doesn't exist anymore. So you're only left with the tactics that work. And so DNA has a tactic that works. And so we have life, and we have human life. Beyond that, I guess you need to be more specific about it.
Well, I guess I'm kind of trying to lead you. I guess I suppose I can share my own view.
Okay.
Of it. And it's quite similar to what you're saying. My own view of it is that obviously it's it's difficult to speak about DNA because it's just a code, but it's just a chemical code. But the way I describe it is it's a bit anthropomorphic, but I feel like it's like a parasitic virus that has infected every cell of every living being, and with its the sole purpose of it is to get get its host to reproduce, and
right.
And I think that explains why there's so much natalist propaganda out there. It explains why religions seem to be so successful, despite the incredible amount of nonsense that they've got within them, even though they might have some truth too. It's because DNA is at the bottom of it all in a way. And anything that DNA finds that will further its goal, it's more than happy to, facilitate, so to speak. I know it's a funny way of speaking, but I just see DNA as an awful, absolutely awful thing, awful like virus that has no, obviously has no compassion or care about its host. And whether the host is smart or stupid, whether the host is beautiful or ugly, whether the host is kind or psychopathic, whether the host is sick or well, DNA is driving the host all the time to procreate. I find that horrific.
Yeah, and that's right. And the thing about the natural world, at least on this planet and throughout the universe, is that whatever doesn't work gets filtered out. So you're only left with, and then what's left strengthens itself. So whatever DNA is doing that works, whether it sets you up for groupthink as a human or whatever it does, if it works to further just move DNA along, then that's what sticks, and the stuff that doesn't work doesn't get reinforced. So yeah, that's very much how it is. And I think what's interesting is by hook or crook, humans have enough awareness and intelligence that they can actually recognize this and move against it. Whereas a rabbit or a bacterium or some other life form, a tree or something, really may not have that awareness and that choice. And so we, if maybe the only species currently on the planet, maybe others, dolphins, it's hard to say, but we definitely have enough intelligence to understand this, identify it, and say, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to just be a cog in a machine. So the fact that we don't, what I don't like is the fact that we have that capacity. DNA, in a sense, gave us too much. We're too smart, but we're not very wise. So it's still working. So until there's more of us and less natalists, it's still working for DNA, at least in the human species.
Yeah. Actually, wanted to challenge one of what you just said. What about homosexuality? Because that's not very good for DNA replicating itself, and yet that's not being eliminated.
I think it might serve, and I haven't investigated this fully because it really hasn't been, to me personally, that big a topic to investigate. Nothing against it, but I think naturally you get some small percentage of people that are outside the norm, and it may have had or still does have benefits to the tribe or to the society or the group to have these people that stand outside of the regular family kind of environment with family problems and family solutions. I think you have it in wolf packs. You have it, whether it's a lone wolves that go off. A lot of animals, I think, have these segments, either whether they become witch doctors or the philosopher or the medicine man or whoever they are. I think it must play a role in the survival of the group as a whole to have these one-offs at some rate, whether it's 5% or 10% or 20%, that benefit the species in the end. That's just my educated guess, but I haven't made a great study of it. So I'm sure someone might have better information or more clear.
Yeah, I have actually come across a similar argument that for example, if you've got a family of several children and one of them's gay, then the gay child can be help raising the children of the other children.
Or also might have other ideas or talents that they can develop because they're not just saddled when they're 13 or 15 with children. Right. There's maybe not much time for a young lady to be creative or thoughtful about doing anything that might help in general the group beyond just foraging in the wild for food and raising babies and doing it again and again and again. So maybe it sets them outside so they can actually think philosophically, mathematically. They might come up with a wheel or a way to move water from the creek up to the top of the hill. Any of those things. I think it just gives them maybe more space to be more thoughtful and creative. But that's just a guess on my part. I'm not sure what the answer is.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another leading question. What are your thoughts about sex itself?
I think generally for a lot of people, it's instinctual. Some people want to think that having children is instinctual, but I think it's more like you get hungry. I don't think my parents ever taught me to be hungry, but the defecation is just a result of having eaten, is it not? Usually people don't say, I want to defecate today, so therefore I need to eat. So I think the procreative nature, the baby comes after the natural sexual activity. So I think sex is instinctual. but I don't think the procreation is just a result of the instinctual sex. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I was kind of I asked you the question because I also want to share some
Sure.
thoughts about sex that I've shared quite extensively fairly recently on my YouTube channel with the some of the theatre that I create in town with my megaphone, which is, to me, in fact, I was just at Speaker's Corner in London on Sunday. I don't know if you know what that is. They have. Have you heard of Speaker's Corner?
No, I've been to London. I thought England was great. I went maybe 10 years ago. I've always wanted to go, and I have some of my heritage from England, Scotland, more extensively. And I really thought the English people were great. And I thought London was interesting. I liked the Cox, what is it? Coxwell? Reminded me a little bit of the hill country here in Texas. But as far as I only had, we had maybe a week in London or something. So I don't think I went there, but I can imagine what it might be.
Yeah, you missed a very great feature, in my opinion, of London, which is there's a corner park, Hyde Park, where every Sunday anybody can just pitch up,
okay,
with a little ladder or without, and start talking about anything they like. And this last week they had these Christian group who had big banners and pictures of aborted babies an aborted baby at a few weeks old. Very graphic pictures, and they were trying to suggest that this is murder and it's the worst thing in the world. And I was arguing, firstly, I was saying to them, why do you worship the creator of this reality? Why would you worship that when there's so much suffering and madness and illness and death and accidents and all the disasters, natural disasters? And then it's kind of occurred to me, even just recently, a new kind of level of questioning around this whole idea of sex, because my thoughts about sex are, these thoughts have only come to me since I've come across antinatalism, is that sex, it's another thing that horrifies me. Not having it, because it's obviously a very enjoyable experience, but the whole idea that if there was a creator, that creator created this trick to trick us into procreating by making the act of procreation A, so incredibly pleasurable, and B, by making the act of procreation create a chemical reaction, a set of chemical reactions in the body and in the brain that switch off a person's logical thinking, and so it seems to me like sex is this awful trick. And I was thinking, like, and I was kind of asking these Christians, I was thinking, what kind of creator would do that? And I was thinking, imagine if I had this technology where I could put, I could create a beautiful, delicious bar of chocolate, the best chocolate you could ever taste, and then I went round just giving it to women, and it made them pregnant. What kind of guy would I be, going around tricking women into creating children? I would be really, really sick if I did that.
And you'd be a cad.
What's
right?
that?
A cad.
Yeah.
Well, that's, that question and the lack of good answers, plus many more, plus physics and the science, eventually, I was always doubtful when I was young, being indoctrinated religiously, very, very strict kind of environment. That's why I became an atheist, because it made absolutely no sense. And even if it did make some sense, I don't have to participate. I can thumb my nose at God and say, I refuse to participate in your little scheme. So either way, if you don't procreate, you're good. You haven't either sent someone possibly to hell, you haven't made them suffer, and you just put the consequences on yourself, whatever you think that might be, or not playing along with his game. But we could have a whole talk about atheism and theism and those things. That's another hour or two on that.
Yeah, but we don't need to do that because that would be a bit
No,
long.
absolutely.
But I do want to just before I move on, I do want to touch upon this idea about God and that a particular aspect, which is I can't see, and this is, I ask a lot of religious people this, and I don't seem to have any decent answers. I can't see how anybody can believe that there is a benevolent creator. That's my thing. In other words, I don't, I'm open to the possibility that this got here by some kind of creator. I don't know. I don't know how it got here. I don't really understand how the world came to be. I can certainly entertain that possibility, but I can't entertain the possibility that that creator was benevolent. It seems to me that creator, if there is a creator of this reality, just for creating sex itself, I would condemn that creator to eternal damnation for doing that. So I can't see any evidence for a benevolent creator. Can you?
No, I can't. And I mean, you can even think of Dr. Frankenstein and his creature, right? I mean, why did he, if you're familiar with the story, which I'm sure you are,
yes.
Why did he make his creature? Why did he try and make life? It was an egotistical thing. I mean, before it was created, the poor monster was doing great in a sense. But it was all about him. It was always all about Dr. Frankenstein. And you have to think from his creature standpoint. It's like, why did you put me in this horrible situation where people loathe me and fear me, and I'm confused and I have no friends, and it's a terrible situation. And you did it all for yourself. You did it for your own ego. And I think of it the same way. He was a creator, just like every parent is a creator. So I just move it up one level. Why would anyone with good sense and compassion create another being to suffer? It doesn't make sense to me at all. It didn't when I was 4 years old. That's why I became an antinatalist at such a young age.
And that's a great question, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is like, why are you an antinatalist? And it's funny because I also became vegan a few years ago, although I don't like to sort of really define myself in any particular way, but I don't eat anything that comes from an animal as far as I know. I sometimes have a bit of honey. But and when people ask me, well, why are you a vegan? I usually say to them, well, actually, why are you a carnivore? And in a way, I apply that same kind of thinking to the idea of procreation. And that's one of the things I've been asking for several years, and offering people even a prize of £100 if they can tell me why they would bring someone into existence. And nobody has come up with a good answer.
Yeah, I don't think they can, because it's just a mathematical fact that someone that's in a state of pre-existence has no needs or wants, and by bringing them here, you suddenly initiate a whole host of issues that then have to be addressed, and usually not ever resolved. Whereas prior to that, there are none. So the concept of null, the concept of prevention, people understand it in other things. They wear seatbelts to prevent accidents. They buy insurance for the fire that hasn't happened to their house yet. So it's not that people can't understand the concept of prevention, but for some reason they just don't want to apply it to the possibly miserable life that their child may have. And it's the risk they're taking, that their child's taking for their own benefit. Yeah, it really does make no sense. It's very simple to me. Some people like to be very philosophical with a lot of philosophical terms. You can write a whole book on it. or books, and those can be good. There are different approaches. You can have a mathematical approach, you can have a philosophical approach. But to me, it's just really a simple act of prevention is what it really is. And that's that.
Yeah. Do you think, okay, so David Benatar, who is probably one of the most prominent academics in this field, speaks about the difference between a life being worthy of starting, which he says it isn't, and a life being worthy of continuing. Do you think there really is such a big difference between those two things?
I do think it has merit to think of it that way, because once you initiate the process of life, you then have an investment because you suffer, whether it's from boredom or starvation or too much heat or not enough heat. You're in the game. And now you have to decide, how are you going to get through the game or extract yourself from the game? So I think there is a difference between understanding that there really is no reason to start a life, but once you do, then you've got a whole host of issues you have to try and deal with all sorts of consequences. So, for instance, if you mention, veganism or vegetarianism or something, there's a whole host of other issues go that if you don't do that, then you have to substitute other calories. And the whole industrial farming complex, all those things, shipping an orange from Florida across to the UK or something, it costs animal habitat, oil, gas. So there's tons of consequences for just maintaining your life as a human being, whether you just, live in an apartment where they just destroyed 5,000 acres of natural habitat that provides oxygen, and animal homes and all those things. You can't get out of the game easily once you're in it. So I think that distinction is a good distinction to make, especially for people who want to argue certain points. This helps delineate the two, because they'll, the why don't you kill yourself type questions. Well, why don't you kill babies? Why don't we just breed people that are always happy? What if we had a happy pill? All those kind of things they'll want to argue. But if you separate not worth starting, immoral to start, if you want to say, versus what do you do now with your life, and what lifestyle choices do you have to make to try and minimize the suffering down the line. I think those are two distinct categories, in my opinion. Oh, hello? Oh, we may have lost the signal. Let's see what happens.
Oh, sorry. I was on mute. Sorry. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about reincarnation?
If it's the traditional meaning that I've known throughout my life, where when you die, you're reincarnated based on some kind of performance in your life, and then you move up and down the scale, and I guess roaches are on a lower scale than some king of humans or something, then I don't believe any of that at all. I don't see any evidence for it. It doesn't make any sense. Now, do I think that the universe exists and there's carbon atoms and all those things, and they get, quote, recycled? Well, of course. But as far as your sentience, I think it's a one and done, the distinct sentience that you have.
Okay. What are your thoughts about euthanasia?
I think people should be free, in general, to decide how long they want to live. Again, once your life is started, though, it's going to have consequences. But whether you're critically ill, or you're just in pain, or depression, unhappy, any situation like that, I do think people should have the choice on their own. You get into situations where, for instance, you have charges, you have children, responsibilities, then more questionable, because the children need a parent, perhaps. You've got people who can't make the decision for themselves, or they're in a coma, or they're just not mentally capable. So it can be quite complex. But I think in general, with a normal brain, and hell, I think you should be able to have access to them.
Okay. I don't have many more questions, so don't worry. We're coming towards the end now. What do you think about antinatalist outreach?
As far as its current success or what we should do, what's
Whether to bother with it, how you think it's going?
Okay. Well, I do think, as we mentioned before, we talked a little bit about ignorance is a major factor in suffering on this planet, at least among humans and the suffering that they cause. So I think anything we can do to minimize that ignorance and at least have people able to consider the concepts and normalize childlessness or non-procreation, let's say, because the forces against it, natalism, are great, and they have money that backs all the different approaches that natalists use, from politicians and people that sell products and people that just sell ideas, religions or cults or other things. So there's huge forces arrayed against antinatalist concept and outreach. So I do think we need to do some. There's a few organizations that put up billboards. We have here in Texas, we have billboards that just say God on them or think God and other types of things. So there's money behind their ideas. I think there needs to be effort and money behind the concept of antinatalism. It's still in its infancy, and in my opinion, most of us are non-professionals. We do it in our part-time. We're not trained advertising agents. So I think we're kind of at the beginning of the normalization of antinatalism. But I think things, once they get started moving, things can move very quickly. I've seen this in my lifetime. When I was younger, when I grew up, when I was very young, there were two sets of water fountains and other things in my environment here in Texas. And one was for colored people and one was for white people. And I remember going to the water fountain that suited my skin color. So we have gone from that all the way to where we have a president that's not white, I guess you could say. And so, in just one lifetime, I think we can have these changes. So I think AN can be normalized. Right now, if you ask someone about antinatalism, they may not even know what you're talking about. I think that's going to change fairly rapidly because I see so many articles now are starting to take it seriously and they write about it. And once it gets to that point where people write about it or against it, it starts to elevate its exposure, and then people will at least know what it is. If you talk to them at a party, they'd say, sure, of course I know what that means. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. But I would like to do that, and I think it could happen quickly, especially with social media that we have, the technology that we have these days in 2022.
Okay, great. Just have you come across the work of David Pearce? He's a transhumanist, I suppose. He doesn't call himself that now because that word's got some bad vibes around it. But he kind of advocates and has been advocating for genetically engineering humans and other species to become less and less prone to pain, to move their, he calls it moving the hedonic set point, so that there are some people who are just really, really happy. They're just you may know people like this that are really, really happy with very little, and they just happen to be like that. That's just the way they're made up. And there are also some people who don't feel pain, and of course that's, at the moment, that's a problem. But if we had the technology whereby if there was something didn't work in your body, instead of feeling pain, that something would just come up on the screen saying, you need to sort this out. What do you think about transhumanism?
Well, I think we would probably need to spend some time on my understanding of healthy self-esteem, which is not what a lot of people have been taught what it is. Like everyone gets an award when they run the race, and that's going to raise their self-esteem. And it doesn't at all. It's pseudo self-esteem. But I think existence requires pain and suffering. It's the feedback system that we have that motivates us to make changes in our environment and what we're doing, whether it's a headache or hunger or anything else. And if you had a car and every time a red light came on, the engine oil light came on, and you just taped it over with a black piece of tape, well, sure, maybe that light wouldn't bother you anymore, but you're going to ruin your engine. And it's easily ignored. So nature has a way, DNA has a way to making sure that you don't ignore that red light on your dash, and it's pain. And whether it's depression or some other issue, it grabs your attention and it makes you act. Is it terrible? Yes, but it has to be that way, or you wouldn't do anything. You wouldn't eat if you didn't get hungry. If you do that. So I don't think you can have true a thriving existence without pain and suffering. And that just, to me, it just exempts existence. Existence is the problem, because if you try and engineer out pain and suffering, you either get a comatose state and there's no motivation to do anything. And how is that any better than non-existence? You just can't have anybody motivated to do anything in life and enjoy it if you don't have the flip side of the coin, the pain and suffering. And that's the tragedy of existence. And I don't think it's worth playing that game. So that's why I wouldn't put someone in that situation. I don't think I'm against transhumanism just because I don't feel it would ever work from my understanding of the way the biology of sentient beings. It just won't work. It's a pipe dream. You can't have it. Who would be motivated to do anything if you were always happy? You wouldn't do anything. And that's just a dreamlike state. That's just being comatose, fundamentally.
Hmm.
So that's my view.
Actually, but before we go, I am actually quite interested in what you were saying about healthy self-esteem. Can you give us just a little bit of an idea what you may mean by that?
Okay, well, I think what's happened is the concept of self-esteem has been co-opted the last, I'd say 40, 50, 60, 70 plus years by people who really don't understand what it really means and how it works. And as an educator and as a person who has lived and also worked in the world, and having studied the psychology of self-esteem for 45 plus years, because I really thought it's most important to understand, how does my mind, how does your mind work? And moving from the lower levels of thinking and intuitive things you do, the lower levels of your brain to the higher levels. And self-esteem really is your valid, factually based opinion of yourself. An honest opinion of yourself. This is what self-esteem is about. And it comes through understanding your achievements and what you're capable of doing through work, through hard work, mental work, physical work, whatever it might be. When you have an accomplishment and you say, okay, now I know how to ride a horse, or I can make a piece of furniture, or I know how to teach mathematics, or I understand antinatalism now. Whatever those things are, that helps develop healthy self-esteem. And there is no shortcut to the sweat equity that you have to put in to gain that kind of self-esteem. Because if you honestly evaluate what you can and cannot do, that's your connection to reality. The further you are from understanding reality, the reality of what happens when you do X or Y and where you're living, the more mentally ill you are. And you see where people take this path where they start ignoring the things they don't want to know about, or they start lying to themselves or other people. And this diminishes their self-esteem until eventually they believe their own lies. And they also require, since they don't feel good about themselves, they rely on other people to prop them up. And so you have these kind of people, sometimes they get into politics, other places they need constant attention, or people telling them how great they are because they don't. It's who was that dictator from the past? Was he French or something? It's like, you know, it basically he would beat people until the morale improved, kind of mentality, and basically said, "Oh, we love you." So you have characters, not to get political. Let's say someone like Trump. Trump is a power-seeking social metaphysician, is the actual term in self-esteem terms, and he's someone that constantly needs the opinion of others to be favorable towards him. So he has a very, very low self-esteem. He's a broken individual, and it's very obvious the type of person he is if you understand what true self-esteem is. But we could start the basics and move from there, and probably spend an easy hour or two just discussing and building up to understanding what self-esteem is and how you develop it and how you can lose it in your life.
Okay, well, maybe we could have another conversation about that another time.
Oh, sure. Well, I think it is important, if you understand that and how your mind works and how other people's mind work, you can make better decisions about things that can help you embrace concepts like antinatalism, because you have an honest view of the reality of around you. And then what can I now do about that? Anyone who wants to skirt that or move around it or ignore it starts to do harm to themselves, and then they start making poor decisions. And so I think it's a fundamental thing to understand and act on a daily basis to make sure you do make good decisions, including that of procreation or not.
Yeah. Okay, great. I really, really enjoyed talking to you, Kirk. And is there anything you wanted to ask me before we finish?
Wow. Well, I know you've had interviews, you said, and I know you have YouTube videos and all those things. So either a lot of things or maybe not much at all. Is there something that you'd like me to ask you that you'd want to emphasize?
No, I'm really fine. I've spoken to so many people about this subject, and
Right.
and I actually did a whole long episode with an antinatalist just last week about being an antinatalist parent. So I don't.
You know what? I may have approved. It's I think it was submitted to the site, so it may have been approved. It might actually be out on the Facebook site if it's what I think it is.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if he wants his name out there, the interviewer.
Oh, Lawrence Anton, his name.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I just approved that today. So
Oh, okay, cool.
On the Facebook site.
Oh, great.
I haven't listened to it yet.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks, Kirk, for being on board today. It was really lovely speaking to you. And yeah, hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Oh, absolutely. I really enjoyed this. I'm glad you asked to be here, and I invite anyone who's interested in having a place to maybe share thoughts and get information to come to the Facebook Antinatalist site. I know there are other places, but I think we have a reasonably good group and some really smart people who have thought this through, of varying ages. I would say the average age is in probably the early 30s in the group, so I'm the grandpa of the whole group. But if you're going to make procreative decisions, the time that you need to do that is in your teens, 20s, and 30s. So that's probably the age that the information is the most important. So you're welcome to come, and thank you so much for your questions, and I hope people enjoyed the interview.
Okay, great. And you'll send me the Facebook link, and I'll pop it in the description box. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now, and wish everybody a good day, good night, and see you soon.